That's right.
So as you know, with the cards, that there's a scene in the story that has to do with that. And it is very, very intense. And that I had in my mind like a movie before I wrote a single word of the book. So I knew that was coming.
That's cool.
That's how it came about.
Good. As I was reading it, I told you yesterday, as we were talking before, as we did a tech rehearsal for this, that I saw the book cinematically as I was reading it. So yeah, it definitely plays out in the reader's mind too, as a movie. It wasn't just something in your creative world, but actually reading it, you can see it all happening in your head like a movie. So while Kristina toggles over to her slide presentation, I just want to recap for those of you who are just joined us or for the recording that we're talking with Kristina McMorris. She's the author of The Ways We Hide. It's a brand new historical fiction book, and it's only been out for a few weeks. It's a World War II novel, and the main character is sort of like the inspiration for the character Q in the James Bond movie. She's a gadget queen. So Kristina, if you'd like to switch over to your presentation, we would love to see your images.
Absolutely. Here you go. Okay, so let's see here. We got PowerPoints. We'll do a share. We'll see if things go. Ta-da!
Ta-da!
We're so good. All right. Well, obviously this is the cover of The Ways We Hide. And actually I'll back up for a second, because as Susan well knows, I won't say much, except I will give a hint about the cover. Obviously, you got that really cool page curl at the top that becomes very significant throughout the story. And the title, as you know, kind of changes as you go through the story and ends up having several meanings in the book. And the little girl, my hope is that an expectation is that you will see her differently when you start the book than when you finish it. And how's that, right? For a little teaser.
I like that. Yes.
Good. And I know you know what I'm talking about. So, all right. So I'll just go through some images here briefly. People ask where my ideas come from for my novels. Obviously, you and I always come across a nugget of history that we think, how do people not know this? But we'll say in this case, what the trend here is that based on photographs that have inspired my books, and in this case, my grandparents' World War II courtship letters inspired letters from home, along with this photograph of them, which I love because they're shaped like a heart, which people don't necessarily see right away, which I love. Similarly, Sold on a Monday was inspired by this photograph that we talked about on this show before. And this was the same website then that I found the photograph that inspired The Ways We Hide. So there was a web link, and I say it's clickbait of the worst kind for historical authors that says 50 the most shocking historical photos you have never seen. And you're like, what 50 photos have I never seen? So yes, I went down the rabbit hole. Luckily, it ended up being one of the most productive days that I had no idea. I found this photo and I found one other. Now, the other one I put in my file folder, and I did not talk about it until just recently because of this book. So it's a bit unsettling because it involves a tragedy in children, but I will just pause on it briefly because it does not seem right not to share it. It did happen and it did inspire the book. So this is the photograph that I came across. And I thought the children were so peaceful and I thought they were sleeping until I read the caption. And it talks about that these are victims of the Italian Hall disaster. And there are actually only a handful of them. There were many more. And I'll tell you about that disaster here in a moment. So the gist of history here, since I know we're all like history buffs and love history on this show. In 1913 in Calumet, Michigan, there were copper miners and they went on strike. So you can see these are some of the miners that did work down there, or up, I should say, up there in the Upper Peninsula, the UP of Michigan. And they went on strike for things as simple as $2 a day. They wanted safety conditions because it was extremely dangerous what they were doing, and shorter hours because they were being overworked. So it all seemed pretty reasonable to me anyway. And they tried to unionize. And of course, that did not go well. So they held out for all these months. And in total, I think it was about 8 months. When it came time for Christmas, you can imagine that they were barely feeding their families, let alone had money for extra to buy Christmas gifts for their kids. As a result of this, the Ladies Auxiliary Group ended up throwing a Christmas Eve party for the kids of all of the copper miners. And this woman named Big Annie, for good reason, she was nicknamed this because she was 6 feet tall and she's Slavic. And you don't say no to Big Annie when she asks you to donate some money for the party. She raised $60, which is pretty incredible at that time, and bought little treats and candies for the kids, put them in barrels, as you know from the story, on the stage, had St. Nick, had music plays, fabulous party. 700 children show up to this party. Now, toward the end of the night, there is a man who went up. You can see that archway there on the left in the photo down below. There are stairs then that go through 2 sets of double doors that go straight up to the 2nd floor, which is where they had the party, behind those big windows. Went up to the landing. They don't know why he did it. All they can figure out is that he supposedly was wearing a Citizens Alliance pin, which was known to be anti-union. He goes up the stairs and he yells a false cry of fire. Now you can imagine what this did. At first, mostly immigrants didn't understand. He yells it again. Panic starts to spread. Next thing you know, there's a stampede that starts down the stairwell, and he runs out. The doors close then. And this is what was seen in the Italian hall the very next morning. So this is the aftermath. Within 10 minutes, 100 people, more than 100 people really, are in the stairwell in what is known as called vertical stacking. So the doors had closed for one reason or another. That's a big controversy of if someone closed the doors or if they closed on their own. Either way, within 10 minutes, 73 people perished, and the vast majority of them were children. So this is something that haunted me, that photo, this story. This is the funeral procession then that lasted over 2 miles through Calumet on a Christmas weekend. 15,000 people lined the streets. There's I believe about 10,000 miners that trained in from other counties just to show their support. So this is just heart-wrenching. And again, I thought, how did we not know about this? So let me hit another admit there. I'm not sure if Karen's doing that or not. So with the procession here, there were, you can imagine, copper miners that are tough as nails, and they are breaking down during the procession as they are carrying the caskets of their children. They are small white caskets for all the kids. Just an incredible, heart-wrenching visual. In one case, a family lost all 3 of their children. In another case, there was an entire family wiped out. And again, I thought, how did we not know this, right, Susan? Like, this is a story that we should all know about. It's not small. So I had that in my file folder, thought, I want to share this. And yet, how can I base an entire novel on this? For me, it would just be much too sad to write about, let alone to read about. So in my file folder, as I told you, I had this other article that's much lighter, How Monopoly Helped Win World War II. And it talked about how, so I can show you my own Monopoly board from World War II that I bought. So you can see all the UK avenues and the British pounds on it, which are very fun. The cardboard pieces, because they did not have metal then to use for anything but other than the war effort at that time. So this was a board that was typically used during World War II. And the story in the article was about how there was an engineer at Waddington's, which is the company just outside London and Leeds, that would go into a secret room with a gentleman from MI9. And what he would do is cut into the board so that was completely undetected. So they never put the sticker on yet. They cut in there 2 files, a compass, and a silk map. And the reason, of course, they use the silk map is because a couple of reasons. It's very, very thin. You have color printed on both sides. It's really ingenious. And on top of that, if you have rain or you drop it in a puddle, it withstands the weather, unlike paper. And also, really importantly, if you are in hiding and you fold it, you wrinkle it, it doesn't rustle and give you away. So all really brilliant. Well, I was fascinated by this. So I start to research a little bit more than I ever had about it. And I find this secret memo. And it is talking about how this is back and forth between a man named Christopher Clayton Hutton, who you know is important in my story, head of the gadget department in MI9, how he would send this memo over to Waddington's and talk about the games. And so we know he's talking about Monopoly, and he was talking about which region of map to put in all of those games. And so that's how we know then that they put different maps inside. And the way you would know what map was inside is that they would put a dot then on avenues to let you know which region it was. And on the outside of the box, they would put a little errant dot as if it were an error that would let you know it was a rigged game. Wow. So all of this is so fun and gives whole new meaning, right, to get out of jail free card. Now, all of these games were destroyed. They were supposed to destroy them once they got them into the POW camp. And so none exist to this day that we know about, but obviously there's a small bit of a trail. Here's Christopher Clayton Hutton, which, doesn't he just look like you picture in the story? Like he's that little kind of eccentric uncle. And he was fascinating because he was put in charge of the gadget department because of a story he shared in the War Office when he was interviewed. He used to be an RAF World War I pilot. He was desperate to do his bit for the war. He used to be a film publicist. He was a bit of a self-promoter, and he idolized Houdini. Houdini had actually won a challenge against him when Mr. Hutton, was only, I think, in his 20s. And because he had an uncle who was, sorry, I'm hitting admit along the way here. He had an uncle who owned a crate making company, as one does. And because Houdini had welcomed challenges for 100 pounds, if he could not get out of something, Hutton ended up challenging him. And they built the crate on stage and ended up, Houdini got out. Years later, Houdini shared how he did it, which is fantastic, and shared that he had bribed the top carpenter, for only 3 pounds. I think he probably could have paid him more, 3 pounds, to nail the nails in at a slant that allowed him to escape very easily. So this is how it was done. He shares this story at the War Office, pulls out a letter that he had sent to Houdini, and Houdini had written, challenge accepted. Now, because of all of this, then he gets put in charge of the gadget department. So you can't make this stuff up. So here is a picture you probably have not seen yet because it is not in the back of the book. There are a lot of photos in the finished copy that you'll see a lot of these, and I'm giving more explanations here. This is Colonel Crockett. So he was a fun character that's in my story as well. And he's an interesting character, and he hated red tape as much as Hutton did. So they kind of just went around a lot of rules. We won't say break them, but they just figured out how to accept him as, proper British gentlemen too. So he was the one that hired him, that told him that he was going to put him in front of MI9 because he loved the story about Houdini. And in my research, there is very strong evidence in one of his biographies I read about 6 years ago, that was published, I should say 6 years ago, about heavy evidence to point toward Houdini serving as a spy leading up to World War I. It all makes perfect sense when you think about it. His father was a Jewish rabbi. He had good reason to spy against the Germans. He would travel all over Europe at will. Nobody questioned that he had trunks full of escape and evade devices. And he would go and perform in front of every major leader in Europe. And then he would even escape out of their maximum security prison as a promotional stunt. And then, as the theory goes, go report back to Scotland Yard. So stranger than fiction, had to go in the story. And also because, this really connects and parallels with some of the actual people and the stories about MI9. So here is Jasper Mescaline, who you have probably not seen yet, but heard about in the story. He was a stage magician that was very good. On the right, you can see that is when he served for the British military in Africa as the head of the camouflage experimental section. Now, he claimed to have done all kinds of things, as I mentioned, the story of hiding tanks and convoys. And how do you hide an entire convoy? Well, he claims he did. Whether or not he actually did that is up for debate. But Benedict Cumberbatch is supposed to star as him in a movie. If that comes together, we'll find out if any of this. But it's Hollywood. You can make a lot of things happen in Hollywood. And so for sure, he did a couple things I'll mention briefly. One, he took this farm called it was called Gibraltar Farm, and he designed it to look like a disused farm when it was actually a secret airfield called Tempsford Air Base in just outside of London. So this is what it looked like during the war. So if you flew over, if you were German, it would not look suspicious, to the point that locals claimed they had no idea it was an air base throughout the World War II. They had like hedgerows all around and, trees, and really protected this. And at night, they were flying out constantly and sending spies to drop into occupied territory. So pretty amazing. And this is a barn, Gibraltar barn, and that still stands. They use it as a memorial toward the people that did drop in. So the SOE, special operations executives, the OSS, all of those impossibly brave people that went to this barn and were what we call kitted out. So they were put on their parachute kits and they were double checked before they flew out, making sure that nothing on them would give them away. You know, making sure that they weren't wearing new clothing versus old that was worn like would be in Europe at the time, that their buttons were sewed on the way that the country would have sewed them on that they're flying to, you know, that if they're going to the Netherlands, that the clothes are like the Dutch people wear, not sewn on like the French. For example, no ticket stubs, right? You know, no receipts to show that you were on a train in Britain. So all of that took place there as well. You know, here's you've seen this. This is a really fun one I posted online. So for those of you seen it before, I'm sure you don't mind seeing it again because it is so cool. This is a replica map deck that Jasper Mescaline also had designed. This, like I said, that mine's a replica though. Otherwise, I would never put it in water. You soak it in there for a couple of minutes and you can see what happens. It splits apart, and now you have a map on both sides. And imagine what happens when you have 52 cards. So I know some of you are going like, oh, that's cool. I know you are. You're muted, but I know you're freaking out because it's really cool. All right, here's another one. So this is just a typical, looks like pencil clip that you'd have for an airman. You can see the crown there that is on the pencil. And now for a escaper, a compass and a map being your two most important things you need. This then is magnetized to point north, and now you have a compass that you can take anywhere and not be questioned, which is so fun.
That's great.
Here's one of my fun gadgets, as you know from the story. It is a cigarette filter that, by the way, cigarette filters, pipes, all of those things had to be in working order, because if they were ever tested and didn't pass, then it would be suspicious, right? So this works. You pull out the cigarette, however, and now that filter becomes a very powerful telescope. This is a gramophone record, as we all remember those really thick ones. Well, it's very handy because there was a nice pocket in the middle there, and you can hopefully see that a little bit to the right, that they put in kind of a hollow pocket that you could put money of that foreign currency, whatever country you're in, so that you could bribe guards or hopefully buy a train ticket if you got that far. False IDs, anything else that you could put in there that was paper. On the right there, you got a dartboard and so many other cool gadgets. You could put so many things behind a dartboard, but they use chess pieces, cribbage boards, dominoes, any little thing you can think of. They found ways to put things inside of them. And one of my favorites, they would send in 3 baseballs. The reason why they sent 3 is because if you had the parts that fit into all 3 of the baseballs, you put them together and you now have a working wireless radio that you could then radio back. And if you're wondering, how did they know that the stuff got through? Well, now you know. They would even radio back at one point toward the end of the war and said, please do not send any more gadgets. We have run out of places to hide them. It's a really, really good problem to have. So it's amazing. And that gives you an idea of how many made it through. Hutton did say in a memo at one point that early in the war, relatively, February of 1942, he actually said that there were almost 500,000 devices that were distributed to all 3 service branches. So that was in early 42. So imagine by 45. And as the war went on, the Germans were not dumb. They did check everything, you know, but they thought by allowing these charitable packages, they send these pastimes in, by allowing them through, they thought they would keep the prisoners busy. So busy that they would not be busy planning escape. Yeah, and not so much. And then they also added X-ray machines toward the end of the war, and that really helped catch a lot of things. But as I said, by then they really kind of had everything they needed. And then you can see in this picture on the left, which I love, and I know I mentioned in the story, is they would take very much a magician's tactic. If you think about quick changes behind stage, and that is that on the outside, it's an Allied uniform. When you switch it the other way, reversible, it could be a German uniform, but you do risk friendly fire. So more practically, you have civilian suit. And I thought that was fantastic. It's so simple. All right, here's 2 more gadget videos because they're just so fun. So here's a typical shaving kit. And as you well know from your World War II stories, you're expected, even POWs, to stay clean shaven. So this is not unusual at all that you would have this. And you've got your razor here inside. And here's the trick. You see that little arrow that's by the circle? Well, there's a reason for that. You drop it in a puddle or a little bit of water. And as I said, all you need is it to be magnetized. And now it points north. So you've got yourself a compass.
Cool.
And here's my last video to share today. This is an airman's watch. So RAF, looks like it's typical. And then you just take out the crown and pry it open with something sharp or a fingernail. And it's not working at all. It's actually a compass that is floating in water. And it's got a little red dot so that you know which way to point it. Right. And here's Hutton again, sitting with many of his gadgets, actually, but my favorite one there is the Hutton flying boot. Notice that he made sure and put his name in there so that everybody would know he created these boots. And I'm sure you remember that from one of the scenes in the book, because I do cover that. But now you'll see it close up. It's in the back of the book as well. And you see how there is that kind of wire that is coming out of the shoelace there. That is being exposed just for the photo. What it was is his friend that he spoke to at one point had a father who was a neurosurgeon. And so when Hutton talked to his friend and was talking about ways to cut through things, he said, my father uses for neurosurgery, so cuts through a skull, so pretty sharp. It was called, I believe it's pronounced a ghillie saw, and it's lightweight and thin, but very strong. And you imagine that it can cut through chain link fences then. So what he did is he made sure and used that inside of the shoelace. So that's hidden by the shoelace that you could pull out. It's got a hollow heel in the shoe. So you could put all kinds of, ID and compasses, etc., and money for sure. And then there was a little razor and cloth that you could then pull out from the shoe as well. And if you were down in occupied territory, you see that swoop around the ankle. Well, that swoop then allows you to take that razor and cut it so that the top part of the shoe came off. And if you notice, what's left is a civilian shoe. So it would not give you away if you had a military boot instead. So we'll just wrap up here by showing the last view is that this is MI9's headquarters. Once they were bombed in London, no one was hurt, thankfully, during the Blitz. So I would say that Colonel Crockett was thrilled actually to be able to move out into the countryside into an area called Beaconsfield. They got to commandeer this gorgeous mansion, and it was known as the White House is what they dubbed it at Wilton Park Estate. And the reason he loved being here, aside from the obvious, is because they got to get away from what they called the pettifogging bureaucrats who were breathing down their necks. And also some of them, I love this, the men from Parliament who were very proper and did not feel that it was gentlemanly to send in sneaky things in charitable packages. So luckily Hutton didn't mind. And also, Crockett felt differently. And as you can imagine, Churchill loved it. So they had no problem with it. And thankfully so. They never violated Geneva Convention by using the Red Cross to do this. Instead, they created fictional charities, I should say, using addresses from bombed out buildings of the Blitz and name them some really pretty daring names sometimes, like the Travelers Association, which I thought was a bit on the nose and kind of brave. And then I'll just show you this because it's not in the back of the book. This is the compound then that is on the estate where the gadget department then moved to at one point. And this is where then lots of scenes with Hutton and Fenna, my character, are over here. And I love this, that it just feels so like in the middle of the forest. Also, by the way, over at the MI9 headquarters in the White House, nobody kind of knew what the other people were doing if you were in different departments. And so just like Bletchley Park, the code breaking, you didn't know what other people were doing. There was just Official Secrets Act meant you didn't talk about it. And so it really wasn't until probably decades later when a lot of this was declassified, not until about 1985, because some of this was so successful, they thought they might have to use it against the Russians during the Cold War. So a lot of this didn't come out until much later. And what they find out later is that it seems to be that over at MI9, they know they did a lot of interrogations and a lot of investigating and translations, interpreting. But the word is that they believe there was an underground bunker that they kept high-ranking German officials in. And the way they got information from them, much more than asking them questions, was they wiretapped the cells and just let them talk to each other all day. So you can't make that up, right? All right. And then just to wrap up here, this is the Netherlands then during World War II, I guess, in my story anyway, and with the canal and Dom Toren, which is the cathedral there. And of course, that it is a huge part of the story. And the reason why I want to mention it is just because the Dutch resistance, I feel like, is not covered much. In World War II stories. We hear a lot about the French resistance, and the Dutch resistance was just incredible. So I think I want to get to some of your questions, Sue. So I'm going to go ahead and jump forward here really fast. There's Dutch people who actually did volunteer for the Waffen SS. There were 25,000 of them, plus a lot of them, they were the patrollers at night during curfew and all that, which surprised me that was not the Germans. And then you have the people, of course, the resistance and the liberation and the joy that came with that, which, what a beautiful photo that is.
Oh, yeah.
Pure joy. And then these are some of which I know I've talked about in the story, the England Varders, and known as, rough translation, England Fairs or England Paddlers. And these people were unbelievably brave and crazy, crossing the North Sea in the middle of the night to escape the occupation, coming over. Here's two brothers in their kayak, if you can believe it. And you're talking 40-foot waves sometimes at night.
Yeah.
Treacherous. The German coast, the Germans covering the defensive coastline, patrollers, the possibility of British Allied aircraft thinking that you're German and strafing you. So thousands of people, try to do this. And I want to say, I think it was about half that never were heard from again. A good number of them that did make it after debriefing and giving all the info they had, there were a good number of them that actually went back and tried to help the resistance, knowing what they were going into. And almost all of them were captured almost immediately upon landing. There was a compromised radio operator that the Germans had, and so they knew all the codes already and were able to locate them right when they came. So super tragic but brave. And this has nothing to do with anything except, oh my goodness, I found this and I'm like,
it's so cute.
The cuteness of these Dutch kids and the joy of these GIs and this beautiful culture that I got to learn about because of the story. And then this is a book club guide for those of you who are in a book club or know people who are, or just love book club stuff, like recipes. On my website, there is a fabulous, my publisher helped put it together, book club guide, and it's got the QR codes for all those videos that are on my website too. But if you want to share them with others, then that's all there, playlists and recipes, which I love them, the Dutch recipes, including a recipe for invisible ink. And it's a really good one too. I tested a bunch of them. I could be a spy with my invisible ink. And that is it, except When We Had Wings is a little over to the right there, and we'll talk about that, because that is our novel together coming out. So, all right, let me stop sharing.
That was awesome. Thank you for sharing all of that. Some of those pictures I had not seen before, so thank you for that. It's just really, really great to put a visual to all of it. So I've been seeing some questions from our audience popping up. So I'm going to take a peek at the chat for a second. And while I'm looking at that, Kristina, if you could just tell us about your two main characters, Fenna. I love her name. It's a Dutch name, correct? Her father was a Dutch immigrant, and she has a Dutch name. It's just beautiful, beautiful name. And then she and her childhood friend, Ari, they have, I don't think it's a spoiler to say that the trouble that was at the Italian Hall, the disaster at the Italian Hall, they were witnesses to that. I don't know if that plays into their personalities, but if you could just explain to us what their personalities were like and how those personalities, how they impact the story then with their choices.
Sure, absolutely. So yes, and I will say they are two of my favorite characters. We're not supposed to pick a favorite character, right? Because they're like our children. We love them all equally, but not. So yeah, Fenna and Ari are two of my favorites. Because you were watching them, as you know, from the story, you start at one point in the story, you back up and you get to see how they got to where they are. I wrote The Edge of Lost the same way. And I think I did actually a little sneak preview, kind of a glimpse of that was sold on a Monday as well. Because I love books like that. I love films like that are, you kind of do a little climax and then you back up and go 6 weeks earlier. And like, how did they get there in 6 weeks? And I'm so in, and so that's a bit of why I did that. And you really get to grow up with them, right? Since they were kids, and the trauma that they go through together and survive, and how that shapes their relationship, how that shapes them as survivors and become very adaptable, but also hide in a lot of ways from a lot of things. And I think that's pretty typical with something that is so traumatic like that, and how you compartmentalize that, and how you survive it, how you adapt to it, and to deal with something like that, especially at a young age.
Right.
So Fenna, yes, is a Dutch, the daughter of a Dutch immigrant. So Dutch name is Fenna. One of the reasons that, of course, I picked that name is because if any of you are familiar with Dutch names, they are not easy. They're not easy to pronounce. Most of them don't sound at all how they are spelled. And thank goodness for my author friends, Jean Kwok and Kimberly Bell, because they were my go-to Netherlands people. And poor Jean's husband had to help me translate all kinds of things into Dutch and make sure I got them right, especially for the time period too, not just today's translation, what they would be. But the reason, yes, I picked Fenna is because Fenna is pretty easy to pronounce, F-E-N-N-A, and I love that her nickname was Fen by Ari. It reminds me a lot of the Irish name that I love, being Finn. And Fen was just kind of a nice little twist on that. And it's, I think, very feminine, but there's something kind of strong, like graceful and strong about it, which I thought was great. And if those of you who don't know about Dutch names and their alphabet, let's just say that the Hawaiians have cornered the market on vowels. And all of the consonants they leave out are the ones that the Dutch took. So they threw all of those consonants, you know what I mean? They threw all the consonants together. It's crazy. And so, yeah, so that was a little tricky. And same thing with Ari's name too, as well. When I came across Ari, I always loved that name. And when I came across that in a list of names that were typical of the time period for boys, I'm like, yes, we're going with Ari, because the other ones were so difficult. And I loved Ari's name. So it fit him well. So the two of them, as far as personality wise, yeah, like I said, they, I think they're very strong, moral people. They're flawed, and yet they're survivors.
Yeah, that's a great answer to that. One of the questions we have here, it's from, let me see if I can put it back up here. It's from Phyllis, and she asks if you have personal involvement with Dutch immigrants and with Northern Michigan, or if these were chosen because of what you saw happen there, but do you have any personal attachment to those two things?
Lots of family from the Midwest, been out there a lot. But other than that, with the Dutch, no, it was, I've often heard that, we've all heard this as authors. And I know, like, I saw Linda's here too, that we've all heard, right? You're supposed to write what you know. Okay, people, there's only so much we know. So that's going to be a very short career. Maybe some people have longer careers than me, but I think it was Jodi Picoult who said, write what you want to learn about. And I thought, I love that. So for me, when it came time to create a character, I ended up, I don't remember exactly how I fell into kind of the Dutch culture of it, but thinking I hadn't heard much about the Netherlands during World War II, and then figuring out that the Dutch were, very heavily in kind of Southern Michigan, and yet not much. So at first, that's why I chose it. I'm like, oh, perfect. They're like in, there's places all over Michigan, people that are from there, like Holland, Michigan. I mean, all of the teams are from towns that are from the Netherlands. And I thought, oh, this is great. They all came and settled there because of religious freedom. And so that's why I went with it. I'll be honest. Okay, people, you are getting the inside scoop today, because we all like to take credit for like, oh yeah, we totally planned that. Yes. And then we go, no, it's because I went, oh, shoot, I thought that she would be Upper Peninsula, would be no different. Not realizing that the Dutch really were not in the Upper Peninsula. It was Finnish, it was Swedish, it was all kinds of immigrants. But for some reason, the Dutch weren't there. And I'm like, I got names of miners that had all worked there or, died in tragedies and whatnot, and looked at their names and what countries they were from. I found, I think, 2 that were Dutch out of all of them. And I thought, okay, that's not fabulous. And then I thought, you know what? Actually, I loved it because my characters then felt a bit like outsiders. They were not really accepted. They did feel different. They were not Finnish. They were not Swedish. And that's even more of a reason they would bond, because they weren't quite like everybody else. So
worked out. Yes.
Yeah, it worked out better than if everybody there had been Dutch. Yeah. Yeah. So
that is cool. Okay, so Joy asked a question, and I actually had the same question: is how did you learn about all the gadgets? Mainly because they weren't declassified until the 1980s. So, and you found a lot. So how did you come across them? How did you unearth all of these amazing gadgets?
Oh my gosh. So there are some fantastic books out there. There's not many, but there's a book called MI9. And when I found that, I'm like, oh my goodness, you've got to be kidding me. And that author, Helen Fry, ended up being my expert, my go-to for MI9. So she read all the chapters that had to do with MI9 and gadgetry and whatnot. And actually, I haven't shared this with anybody before. You guys are getting such the good big scoop. Okay. Okay, I'm going to grab a book. Hold on. which is like always up here lately, but I've never shown it. What it is, can you believe this is a book that is MI9 gadgets? This is the whole book. Like, what are the chances? Just this collector who is fascinated by the gadgetry. And so it's Phil Froome, and he, so everything in here, photos of all the, can you believe it? All the gadgets. And so I learned about through here, reading a lot, going through documentaries, like every book I can read about MI9. But yeah, that book was like, oh, you know how I'm talking about. It's when you find literary gold, the research.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Who would have thought? There's a whole book that's like 300 pages of nothing but photos of gadgets.
Oh, those are the best.
Yeah, it was amazing.
That's terrific. Thanks. Okay, so Corinne asks, was working in MI9 as secretive as working for Bletchley Park?
I would think so, yes. Yeah, I think it was, I would think it's pretty equal from everything I know about Bletchley Park. Official Secrets Act kind of bound everybody. And just like in the movie that I love, Imitation Game.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, so good. And at the end, right, so visual that they have to burn everything. If you've all seen that, if you haven't, you need to see it. Burn everything at the end and pretend you were never there. Same idea with MI9. You leave and you don't get to talk about it. So there was even Hutton, who tried to write a memoir, at the time, you just call it autobiography, I guess, all about his experiences and trying to talk about the gadgets he came up with and invented and that were amazing after the war. And they really fought him on it. So it took him, he went legal battle for a long time until he finally got to publish something that had a lot of it cut out, but it does exist. And I use that as my reference to hear his voice and his words and his experiences, so that I got to pull from that, like which from the story. I know readers have told me that they love this soup, like pea soup, I guess, kind of can incident. It's so fun. And I had to go in, and that was all based on true story that I got from his book.
Wow.
So
cool.
So so yeah, to answer your question, I think that he didn't get to talk about it for many, at least 10 years. So yeah, I think they were pretty quiet.
Wow. That's terrific. So I think I got to most of the questions that we had. A lot of the comments were really, really nice ones, just saying how wonderful the book sounds and hellos to you and me. So thank you, everybody, for those wonderful greetings. What I think we'll do is, if you have a question and you'd like to post it in chat, do that now. Or if you asked a question and I somehow missed it in the scrolling, if you wouldn't mind posting it again. Kristina and I are going to take just a few minutes to talk about an upcoming book that we have coming out together, since we have about 12 minutes left before we need to wrap things up. So Kristina, tell us what you have next on the horizon, because I think I know what it is.
You do? How would you know?
I know. I think I might know what you have next on the horizon.
Yay, I know. Oh, you guys, we're so excited, and I cannot wait. Susan and I get to fly on a plane together. I'm going to meet her up in Seattle, and we get to fly to Nashville together to be there for the kickoff launch at Parnassus in Nashville on October 18th. The book then is called When We Had Wings. And as some of you may know, there's a reason that we titled it that. It's actually Susan's suggestion of a title, which is beautiful, is because it is about the nurses who served in the Philippines during World War II. And Susan, you can fill in more, but I will just say briefly that Susan brilliantly came across this documentary about these women who had served that we had never heard about before, called the Angels of Baton. They were dubbed that by the servicemen because they were so incredible, because they not only somehow, through 3 years of Japanese terrible, treacherous conditions of occupation and being some of the first female POWs of World War II, not only survived all of that somehow, they also took care of all the people around them. They risk their lives almost daily trying to keep someone else alive, and whether that's just standing up for someone or even trying to get medication on the black market and risking their lives that way. And then when the war was all over, they came back to the US and they weighed about 80 pounds. They threw some lipstick on them, took them on a little shopping tour, and then MacArthur took them on a victory tour that just kind of showed them off. At the same time, they said, do not talk about your war experiences. And they were kind of sworn to secrecy for much of their lives, until thankfully, some of them wrote memoirs toward the end of their lives and got to share their experiences, thank goodness. But the reason being, I think when people ask me, why did they not get to talk about it? The only thing that we can figure out really is that it did not show well in the US government to have abandoned these women, the same as we all know that much more well known being the death march of Baton. And so they were abandoned along with them. And it was not very heroic kind of picture that it got painted. But in our story, we got a US Army, US Navy, and a Filipina nurse. And when we found out those were the 3 types of nurses that served, we're like, there's 3 of us and there's 3 nurses. And we become fast friends. I feel like don't you? Like we talk about we as if we're the nurses, but they became fast friends and right on the cusp of the attack on Manila, which very much is an echo from the day before of the attack on Pearl Harbor. So being the Pearl of the Orient, lush, tropical, gorgeous station that you think that you have just made it, and being stationed in this beautiful paradise until the attack happened, just like Pearl Harbor the very next day, and their lives completely changed. So there you go.
Nice summary.
Yeah.
I'm really excited for this one to make its way into the world, because these women deserve to be remembered. They were so amazing. Most of the POWs, when they were sent to these camps, were not able to do what they'd been, sent to the islands to do. If you were a pilot, you couldn't fly a plane. If you were a military, communications officer, you were not communicating anything. But these nurses, they still did what they had been sent to the Philippines to do, and that was take care of people. And boy, did they take care of them with practically nothing. So they're amazing women. We can't wait for you to meet them. That book comes out October 18, and we're really excited about it. So I think we've got just a few minutes left. We have 10 minutes left, and I think there are a couple more questions in the chat. So let me just back up a little bit, and let's see here.
Really quick, Sue, while you're doing that, Judy here brought up a really good point. I don't know if we mentioned Ariel's name, and we must.
Oh my gosh. Yes,
Ariel. Ariel who? We just totally did this book with ourselves, and she just added a few words. But oh my gosh. Ariel Baton is our good friend and best-selling author. She wrote Codename Helene, and I Was Anastasia, and she is so much fun. And she's a brilliant writer. If you guys have not read I Was Anastasia, she's written a lot of great books. That's my favorite of hers. I Was Anastasia is just it's masterfully constructed, my favorite Ariel Lahan book. So I can't say enough good things about it. All of her books are great, but that one's my absolute favorite. Yes, she's the third. And by the way, everyone, we'll be doing, the 3 of us are going to come back here next month and talk about more about the book and our research. And so all 3 of us will be here. And aside from other events we're doing, like in San Diego with Warwick's and Adventures by the Book, etc., we will also be doing some virtual events. So just look on our websites and on our social media, and we'll share in case you're not near us. You'll hear all kinds of scoops. So do we really like each other after writing a book? I'll tell you the truth.
You could come back to the next Save Ellis Island author to author event, and you can ask us all those questions about what it's like to write together. We have some stories to tell. All right.
We still love each other.
We do. So Bonnie would like to know, how do you know when you've done enough research to start writing?
Do we ever? No, I think it's called deadline. Yeah. Otherwise, I think when we just keep researching and plotting, and I don't know. So I'm a plotter. And I don't know many historical authors that don't plot, just because I think that's more common to be a plotter, because there is so much research. Otherwise, how would you know when to start, and how otherwise it'd take us 10 years to write a book. So I research for about 4 or 5 months. Once I have that premise, that is like my elevator pitch for Spielberg. One sentence, oh, that poor man, he will never get out the elevator with me. I'm gonna be like, if you don't like that one, I got 6 more. And so once I have a premise, which by the way is kind of a side note of your question, but how do I also know that it's the right story for me? When I come up with that 1 sentence pitch, that when I tell it gives me chills, and when I run it past some good author friends who they get chills, and then you go, okay, I think I've got something here. Then I dig into the research, and I probably go usually about 4 months or so, I want to say, of researching heavily, and it helps guide my story. So I keep finding things that you're like, oh my gosh, this needs to go in there somewhere. And of course, we don't just shove it in if it doesn't work, but you go, this is what she would do. This is why, And it really is pretty cool when you find things like Houdini was a spy. I mean, come on. That's a good research day.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I'm the same way. I feel like I reach a point where I know I have to start. So I'll even put a date on the calendar. This is the day I don't finish research, but I start writing, because the research goes on and on, even while you're writing. But if I don't put a date to start, the research part is so much fun and writing is hard. So I put a date to start. But that's a great question.
That's super smart. And I keep I know you're the same. We keep researching as the book is going. So I write in a Word doc. It is not fancy, and have a million, it feels like a million comment boxes throughout the whole book. So constantly looking things up, and also looking up, you probably use Etim Online, right? Like etymology for people who know. It's Etim Online. If you are a word geek like us, you will love this site. And that's where I go constantly as I'm writing, making sure any word that I think, that word, that idiom, is that really from this time period. Just because a word existed, right, does not mean they used it in that context, does not mean that you had that definition, which is why the dictionary has like 20 definitions for one word. So going there is my go-to. And it's amazing. I don't know about you, but it's amazing to me how many idioms have been around 1600 or something. You go, I thought maybe it was too modern. And then you go,
right?
It's not. No, it's not.
I know. And so many of them came from Shakespeare.
Yes, right?
Right?
Goodness,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, definitely. So I should say that the person who reminded us that we had not mentioned Ariel's name, you said it was Judy. And I wondered, was that my mom? And it was my mom. Thanks, Mom. Thanks for keeping us on the ball.
Moms are the best.
Moms are the best. What would I do without my mom? Okay. This is a great question from Francis. Just wondering, new movies from your books. And I don't know if there's anything you can talk about, because sometimes if we have something in the works, we can't say anything. Sometimes the options haven't been sold. Sometimes the options have been sold, but nothing has happened yet. Is there any news on your front that you could talk about with regard to your books and movies?
Let's see here. So the pieces we keep having to do with Nazi spies dropped off by U-boat on the east coast of America in 1942. Crazy stranger than fiction story with J. Edgar Hoover, secret military tribunal. I mean, all that good stuff that's very movie-like. That has producers that optioned it. They re-upped their option, and they have a screenwriter attached. So you never know. Like 2020 taught us anything is possible.
Yay!
So that's fun. And
good.
As far as the ways we hide goes, that one actually, I just was just told just last week that my dream agency that, I definitely wanted them to rep this book in particular of CAA, and they did. They agreed to it, and they're very enthused, and there's some interest already, but you never know. Well, I'll let you know if there's more.
Terrific. That's great. Excellent. Someone else asked, will the book, the way when we had Wings available on the website, the Save Ellis Island website, it will be when it's released, and the Ways We Hide, which is already out, is available on the Save Ellis Island website. So yes, to both of those questions. Okay. Let me make sure I don't miss.
I'll mention too, really quick, Susan, I'm sorry. Just that I also sent book plates to Save Ellis Island for that. So just know that they'll also be like signed as well.
That's terrific. It's always nice to have a signed book. So any last minute comments from you, Kristina? I had a bunch of questions that we didn't get to, which is fine. We've had a lovely time together, but was there anything else you wanted to say about the book that we didn't get to?
And just that there was a lot that went into this book, as you well know, a lot of stuff like just personal life, and a lot of, family transitions, and a health scare that luckily ended up, fortunately, really well. And teaching two teenage boys how to drive simultaneously.
Oh, that's right. That's right. That was also happening. And this was also would you say this was the book that you wrote during the pandemic?
Oh, yeah.
Is this your pandemic book? Because we all have one of those. This is your pandemic, right?
This is it. And evacuated for the wildfires. I mean, it was like being in a reality show where the producers are like, there's not enough happening. Throw something else at them. So that was my life for about 2 years.
I've noticed sometimes that the books that we write in the Crucible, those are the ones that really, they've been a test of our mettle. And so they're the ones actually that end up being the best books we've ever written. So Yeah, this might be destined to be your best. You never know.
I feel like it is. I am so proud of this book for all the things that happen in life on the way to finish it. But really, truly, I feel like it's my best book yet. I genuinely say that. I feel like I love the characters more than probably anything I've written before. The complexity of the story. It's just kind of epic in scope in how much it covers. And then also, as we said, the research alone was enough for 3 novels, which if I had known that ahead of time, story would be very, very different and much shorter. But because of all that, I'm so proud of it that to have it now out in the world. And as I just finished, as you know, a tour that was all kinds of insane. It was 18 flights in 14 days. I don't recommend that. But I got to meet so many people, and I know some people are here today as well that I got to meet on the road, and that was such a joy. And to hear feedback now on the book of things, that they learned so much and they made them want to look up more, and that they couldn't put it down. And oh my goodness, those are just the best kind of compliments. So
That's
thank you.
terrific. Well, we're coming up on an hour. I have some closing comments for everyone. I just want to thank you all for being here. Thank you for dealing with all of our technical issues. I salute Karen for being able to handle all of this from using just her phone as her computer froze up on her. So we were able to get through everything and without a glitch that we can tell. So thanks for being here. I just have a few things I want to tell you before we leave. One is, if you'd like to hear Kristina and Ariel and I talk about When We Had Wings, we will be back in this space on October 26th at the same time, 7 Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. And we will be able to answer all your questions and show you some pictures about from the history of these women, pictures that were taken in Manila, and then after they were rescued. So put that on your calendar. Thank you, Kristina, for coming and being here today. It was wonderful. We loved having you. Autographed copies will be available in the Save Ellis Island shop, which is just saveellisisland.org. And join us next month for our appearance on October, I think it says 25. I thought it was 26. Just check on the website to make sure. Yep. And then also, while you're on the site to register for that event, do consider becoming a member of Save Ellis Island. It's because of your patronage that we're able to restore the hospital buildings, which if you've never been to Ellis Island to see the hospital buildings, you need to go. There's a hard hat tour that you'll never forget. It's just wonderful. So much history happened in those buildings, and it's up to us to keep them restored for the next generation to be able to see and learn from and enjoy. So thanks again for being here. We hope to see you again next month. And again, you're the reason why we are able to have these events. So thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks for listening, and good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye, sweetheart.